Disney have what we would call a traditional formula for a large amount of their films. Now, of course, that isn't always the case, but a huge amount of Disney films have this formula. Musical, female-driven lead, plucky comedy sidekick, some form of love story, whether that be romantic or family, and some form of evil entity set out to destroy the protagonist. Now, I'm not here to crap on that formula. It's a winning formula and it's been around for years, but it's always nice to change that formula slightly. Never before has this been more prominent with a film like Treasure Planet, a film that quite simply changes everything about that formula on its head to deliver perhaps one of the greatest Disney films they have ever produced. Which is really sad because of this film's reception when it came out. It was a box office bomb. Hi there, it's me, the Average Critic, and let's talk about the beauty that is Treasure Planet, a film that was ahead of its time. So Treasure Planet came out in 2002 and was following Disney films like Lilo and Stitch and Atlantis: A Lost Empire. You see, Treasure Planet was hot in the early 2000s, Pixar was spewing out incredible films like A Bug's Life and Monsters Inc., and computer-generated animation was hot in the market. Treasure Planet uses a mix of traditional 2D drawn animation and a computer-generated imagery to blend this old and new style of animation that you simply just don't see anymore. And probably for good reason, as this film was a box office bomb and is the most expensive traditional animated film to date, with a budget of $140 million. Let's go back to that formula first of all. Firstly, instead of a female protagonist, we have a male lead, in which he isn't your traditional older handsome prince. Jim Hawkins is a young teenager with a James Dean-inspired design, giving him the misunderstood rebel look, which specifically for a male Disney protagonist is nothing like the nerdy buff Hercules or the poor but whimsical Aladdin. Jim is moody, layered, and damaged. This also isn't a musical, which I am so grateful for because it would take away from the more grounded and layered style of storytelling that this film is going for. Your comedic character doesn't turn up until the end of the movie, and we will talk more about him later. And a love story is nowhere to be found and chooses a much more subtle relationship of a surrogate father and son relationship between Jim and Silver. And speaking of Silver, your antagonist isn't just some run-of-the-mill mustache-twirling villain, but is a layered and damaged character in his own right. Treasure Planet knows that its audience are smart enough to play along in the film. In other films, it's easy to write a love story because it drives the story along. It's easy to make a musical because Disney had access to some of the best composers ever. It's easy to have a simple evil villain because it stops a film from being boring. But Treasure Planet allows the audience to understand this film's themes and character and take this film into new heights. Even the style of the world with its blend of 18th century and futuristic tones, giving a steampunk-styled vibe, just allows the audience to play along. Listen to the opening.
On the clearest of nights, when the winds of the Ethereum were calm and peaceful, the great merchant ships with their cargoes of Arturian solar crystals felt safe and secure.
The narrator speaks about Arturian crystals and the winds of the Ethereum. We never really get an explanation as to what any of this is. But we don't need to. The audience just fill in the gaps themselves. In any other traditional film, we would ask why are we talking about the things we're talking about, and we would get some form of exposition scene where everything gets explained, what this world is, and why this world is the way it is. But Treasure Planet dumps everything on you and lets you fill in the gaps yourself, which is just so brilliantly steampunk. Even the music has the blend of traditional orchestrated music with two modern pop songs sung by John Resnick. James Newton Howard mixes traditional Celtic music with strong electrical guitar and modern day instruments to create a beautiful and uplifting score that captures that steampunk-esque style of pirates in space, sounding like a mix of Star Wars meets Lord of the Rings. You see, the crew used something called the 70 by 30 law, which meant that 70% of the film should be traditional 18th century style and 30% should be sci-fi modern. Everything in the film, to the art direction, the music and the characters, add to this sentiment. I mean, just look at a character like Captain Amelia. She wears traditional 18th century clothing and yet is some form of alien cat. And even looking at how she speaks.
Mule and blabber about a treasure map in front of this particular crew demonstrates a level of ineptitude that borders on the imbecilic.
Her dialogue reflects the time period, but we are clearly in some form of futuristic setting. I mean, this is a Disney movie, a company that generally makes films for younger audiences, and you have the amazing Emma Thompson making her dialogue sound like poetry. I mean, who talks like this in a Disney film? It's so refined and mature that it brings me on to my second point that this film isn't for kids at all. It's for teenagers and really young adults. You see, if you're a kid of the 90s, we had what we would consider the Renaissance period of Disney films. And what makes this time period great is no matter when you were born in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was a great time for Disney films, and you were probably a young teenager or early adult. So you grew up at a young age with Disney films like Oliver and Company, Aristocats, and The Lion King, so by the time a film like Treasure Planet comes along, you aren't a kid anymore, and you're trying to figure out your future, much like Jim. Jim, being the age he is incredibly different to other Disney films, as the moody teenager is a hard thing to pull off without making your character annoying. Audiences relate to Jim on a high level because every single person goes through this at some stage. Jim has an incredible amount of depth because of his abandonment with his father. In the original book, Treasure Island, Jim goes off to find the treasure for riches and adventure for the sake of his own reasons. In Treasure Planet, he uses it as a reason to prove himself and his mother that he isn't the person everyone sees him as, which is incredibly relatable. But coming from Jim, we get to talk about John Silver, who definitely hands down is one of the most interesting villains in any pop culture. First, let's Google what villain, or rather antagonist, is defined as. Google defines antagonist as a person who is actively opposes or is hostile to someone or something, an adversary. So, yes, Silver is this title. He stages a mutiny, threatens to kill the main characters, and we are even warned about him by Billy Bones at the start of the movie. But Silver is more than just a run-of-the-mill villain. He becomes his own character with depth, layers, and his own personal problems. And even though at first Jim Hawkins is hesitant to trust him, we then get introduced to perhaps one of the greatest musical montages in cinema history, the I'm Still Here sequence. Just before this scene, we are told Silver is going to run him ragged with chores, still showing Jim doesn't quite trust Silver. But then we get the film's first contemporary songs written and performed by John Resnick, who probably does some of the most potent and emotional lyrics I have ever heard of. There's a reason this song is entitled I'm Still Here, Jim's theme, because it all reflects what Jim is thinking and feeling. We finally get to see the distant relationship Jim had with his father, juxtaposing that with Silver teaching and bonding with him. Silver is an incredible character, not just in this version of Treasure Island, but in all the versions. He is an anti-villain that Jim has needed his whole life. He's a surrogate father figure that Jim needed in order to guide him. He then becomes the villain Jim needs to test and defeat when standing up to him in the final act of the film for Jim to prove himself, and then by the end of the film, when asking Jim to join him, he completes his arc of passing his knowledge on to Jim as he learns from Silver to chart his own course and stick to it. If Silver didn't have a relationship with Jim, he would probably just be another simple villain. But because of their relationship, we even get hints of Silver's obsession and sacrifices chasing after the treasure. It's a small line of you give up a few things chasing a dream, but adds such layers to Silver's character as yes, he becomes a character we know to be the villain, but becomes a character we love. Jim very much represents the audience in this movie, as we're told from the start to beware of the cyborg. Even when introduced to Silver, we have several scenes foreshadowing him as the villain of the film, but seeing his relationship and what he offers to Jim by being a support and someone who simply tells him that he is worth it and that he has makings of greatness in him, Jim and the audience blindly trust Silver to become much more than just the villain of the story. Okay, so we kinda do have to talk about the elephant in the room. In the mid to final act of the movie, we get introduced to Ben, this version of Ben Gunn, who is an android stranded and left with his memory missing. Now, let's be honest, as far as comedy sidekick goes, Ben isn't as strong or as funny as, say, Timon and Pumbaa or Phil from Hercules. But as much as Ben does serve a slight purpose to the story of keeping the film on its narrative to move the story more quickly to its climax, he does feel a little bit off and not all of his jokes do hit perfectly. That being said, despite Ben not being the funniest of Disney's comedy release panel, he doesn't resort to stupid fart jokes, and they do rely heavily on the voice actor Martin Short, who is a funny comedian in his own right. Even though Ben can come across as a little bit stale, you never feel awkward or forced when his character does say something. Nailing the comedy role is perhaps one of the hardest parts in any film like this, and Treasure Planet may not hit gold, but they certainly don't miss the mark, and it doesn't affect the movie that drastically. Now we finally talked about Ben, we get to go back to Jim, who of course makes this film great because of this film's themes. You see, Disney do a lot of love stories, and I mean a lot of love stories. And believe me, I'm not complaining, everyone loves a great love story. But Treasure Planet does something you never expect a Disney film to go, and that's the internal relationship this story has. You see, Jim doesn't learn to love someone else or through someone else, he kind of learns to love himself. Treasure Planet is about self-worth. Jim wants to prove to himself that he has self-worth and a future for himself. He learns with Silver, as even at the end when asked to leave with him, he declines because of what he learns from him. Now it does help that how everything that happens in this film, story-wise, does match the original book. Silver is set free at the end, and the relationship is kind of exactly the same. But Treasure Planet offers a few modern changes to help make this film more emotional. Jim is slightly older, giving him self-doubt that we all have at that age. The pop culture songs give this song a much more young teenager vibe who want to rebel from social standards, and of course, it's in space, which again stops this film feeling old and out of date. Treasure Planet truly was a film that audience and critics weren't ready for, as Disney weren't supporting this film on a financial level and really just wanted to let this film die. If you want to know more on this subject, I recommend watching Breadsword's video Treasure Planet, Disney's Biggest Mistake, as he really delves more into this topic. But Treasure Planet has really gained a cult following in later years, and even myself, I didn't watch this film until like 2013, and I was just totally blown away in how good it was, and so deeply saddened by how badly it was received. If I could describe Treasure Planet, it's this. It's lost treasure. It's about self-worth. It's about coming of age. It's about finding yourself in the world when you've never felt more lost. And when you do find that lost treasure, it's an incredible feeling. To me, Treasure Planet is probably one of the greatest animated films ever created. And the fact that it bombed when it first came out is probably one of the biggest shames in cinema history. I loved the Treasure Island book, but Treasure Planet just takes it out of this world. So after all that, it gets my professional rating of 9 out of 10, as Ben isn't the best comedy sidekick and can feel awkward on first viewing, but it gets my personal rating of 1,000,000 gold doubloons from Flint's Treasure out of 10, as this film spoke to me on a much more deeper level that is very hard to convey in words. But thank you for joining me in this very special video. I do hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comment section below what you thought of Treasure Planet. If you did, please give this video a like and of course subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a single video. You can also follow me on social media to keep up to date with all of my personal life as well as my videos as well. I'm usually posting on there, but thank you so much for joining me in this video and I will see you all in the next one.